All right, let's get to another segment. It's another basketball segment. We're going to go by the numbers this week, Cedric, and everybody's talking about March Madness, Selection Sunday coming up. Who's on the bubble? Who's off the bubble? Give us a number to keep in mind as we think about NCAA tournament selections.
I'm going with number 6, and that's the amount of teams I think from the Big 12 that are going to make the NCAA tournament. This is not going to make me very popular in Austin, and they hate me anyway. I don't think the Texas Longhorns are going to make it into the tournament. I think they're going to lose to the Kansas Jayhawks and Oklahoma Sooners, who have been a favorite of Joe Lunardi for ESPN. The bracketologist, I think they're out too. Losing at the buzzer to West Virginia didn't help their cause. So I'm going Texas Tech, Kansas State, Kansas, Baylor, Iowa State, TCU. 6 teams from the Big 12 get in.
Yeah, and I think there's as many as 8 being talked about as potential NCAA tournament teams, with TCU also in the mix. They did win, beating Oklahoma State in the first round of the Big 12 tournament, so where's their stock? But here's my number, Cedric. I'm going with 7. That's the number of Big 12 teams that Oklahoma has defeated this year, and I think it's enough for them to get in. I know it's crazy. I know that a 7-12 team, a 7-11 team in the regular season, they just lost to West Virginia, as you mentioned, Cedric, is crazy to think. But Oklahoma's won 19 games. They've played no games against these the lowest quadrant team, which now the NCAA tournament selection is so keen on. I know you're against it, Cedric, but I think Oklahoma's in. I think it's their body of work. They had a great non-conference schedule, lots of wins. I think they get in, but I think people are going to crow about it, don't you?
I know they will, and especially if they get in at 7-11 and the 8-10 Texas Longhorns are left holding the bag.
Yeah.
Texas didn't take care of business in non-conference, and that's going to hurt them, I think. They beat North Carolina, which was a quality win. But you can't lose to Radford. You can't lose to Virginia Commonwealth. And you can't blow a 19-point lead in Waco in a must-win game. You also can't pull a no-show against TCU on senior day on the last regular season home game. So the Longhorns have to beat Kansas, or it's just not going to happen for them. Because if they lose to Kansas, they're 16-16. At least teams like TCU's got 20 wins. The Sooners have 19 wins, and those teams have taken care of business in other areas. Even if OU gets in at 7-11 over 8-10 Texas, that's just going to mean that the Sooners took care of business in non-conference and won some games that they needed to win to fatten up their record. Texas has no one to blame but itself if it misses this tournament.
Yeah, you know, Cedric, I think it bears in mind that whether it's how many teams get in from the Big 12 or does a 7-11 Oklahoma get in or not get in, a lot of that is going to depend on these other conference tournaments, what these other bubble teams do. And this is obviously very much a influx situation as we angle towards that Sunday late afternoon announcement of the field. 68 teams. It's still weird to say that for me.
It's not 64. I like the word. I like the number 64 more than 68.
Yeah, 64 for so many years, and then it expanded a little, and then a little more. Now we're at 68. So those first 4 games that'll be in Dayton on Tuesday and Wednesday next week, who will be in those games, who makes it, who doesn't. Obviously, always a point of debate, but the big question will be what happens in these other conference tournaments. I think the Big 12 has shown it has great depth in its league. Really only a couple teams that are truly out of the conversation at this point. So what happens in other conference tournaments? The Power 5, if you will, they've got some bubble teams. So does a team that is maybe in the conversation along the same lines as Texas, Oklahoma, TCU, do they win some games and maybe boost their stock? Do you have a mid-major that maybe makes a move and wins a conference tournament unexpectedly? It's really it's always fun to me to have these debates, and you always are mindful, at least I am, Cedric, of teams in past years. You know, Maryland, Baltimore County a year ago, Loyola Chicago making it all the way to the Final Four. You wonder, who's that team this year? But you also think, is there a chance that one of those teams that could be that team gets left out entirely because of a Texas, an Oklahoma, a TCU. It could happen, but you're always looking for that next upset, that next Cinderella. Who's it going to be? I don't know who it's going to be, but it's always got to be a dance, don't you think, with the selection committee looking at these Power 5 teams versus the mid-major teams?
It's not an easy job, and I don't envy those guys on that selection committee. I think if you're Texas, if you're in Oklahoma, teams like that on the bubble, even a TCU, you want the chalk to rule the day in these conference tournaments. You want teams that have won the regular season to win the conference tournament. You don't want what happened the other night, St. Mary's beating Gonzaga to win that conference tournament, because now two teams, is the Mountain West, I believe, two teams from that conference are going to be in the big dance now. Yep. Gonzaga is being still talked about as a #1 team. They were the #1 team in the country when they lost. So that didn't help Texas's cause or OU's. So, and I think, Jen, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think a 7-11 team from the Big 12 has ever made it into the NCAA. Some 8 and 10s have made it, but I don't think a 7-11 has ever made it. And I do know a 500 team from the Big 12 overall, a 500 team overall in all of college basketball has never made the tournament since they expanded to 68. So Texas is the epitome of a bubble team. They finished 16-16. Their season is over as far as the NCAA's is concerned. My job has just begun because I'll be covering them at the NIT.
Well, by the way, a quick correction, West Coast Conference for Gonzaga and St. Mary's. Okay. I know, I forget too, so I corrected myself there as much as anything. But fascinating, always interesting to talk about who's in, who's not. We'll find out for sure Sunday when the Selection Sunday brackets come out. You can fill them out, pick your teams. I'm sure we'll be talking about that next week, Cedric. We'll be right in the middle of early action when we have our writer's block next week.